So I got some thoughts about the Bible today. I was thinking about this the other day, just thinking through maybe why we have so many issues with the Bible and so many ways of understanding it, interpreting it. And I've commented this below on someone else's post, but they said something like, the text is clear, like these are some scriptures to defend their position. And my response was, okay, I know what the text says. You know what the text says. I mean, you're bringing that before me. I know what it says. But what does it mean? And so it brought me to what I believe the biggest problem with the Bible is. And the problem is maybe not even exactly what it says. I think the problem with the Bible is that nowhere in scripture do we have instructions on how to read it. This is the problem. We have this text, we have these words written over a long period of time by various authors from various theological perspectives and cultural perspectives. And there's diversity inherent within the text, but there is no guidelines to how to deal with that diversity or how to understand that or understand the text itself. There is no guidelines. So that's the biggest problem with the Bible. We don't have instructions in the Bible about how to use it. And it's just something so basic. I remember growing up hearing that they use an acronym for the Bible, and they said that the Bible stands for Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. That was one of the acronyms for the Bible, and I think there's a lot of problems with that acronym. But even with an acronym like that, okay, there's like, okay, we have oriented ourselves to use the Bible for a certain reason, right? These are instructions to get ourselves right before we leave the earth. I think the Bible is so much more than that. But at least that was like some type of paradigm to try to figure out how we use this book. And of course, that was extra biblical. That wasn't in the text itself. So within the text, we don't receive anything like that. We don't receive like, this is how you should understand this. And we see it modeled, don't get me wrong. I think we see it in Jesus ultimately. We see him using like the Old Testament scriptures in new ways or fresh ways. We even see Paul doing that. We see the gospel writers doing that. Some might even say that they are taking the scriptures out of context. And you might say that, or you can say that they are giving the scripture or using the scripture to make sense of their current context, which I think is appropriate. It's always appropriate. And I would argue that we're always taking the Bible out of context because, for one, we don't really know what the original writers really meant. I mean, we can have ideas, context clues, and all this stuff, but we really don't know. So to read the Bible anytime apart from like the original time period or you know context is always taken out of context. So as long as you read the Bible in the 21st century, you're going to be taking it out of context. So that's just inherent within the process. So that's one part of it. But the biggest issue, going back to my biggest issue with the Bible, is that we don't have instructions on how to do it, how to read it, how to make sense of it. And like I said, we do have examples, and I think that's why it's important to pay attention to how people are using scripture in the scriptures. I think that tells us a lot about how we might understand it, or read it, or make sense of it. And we see this really in Jesus. You can see that a lot of it in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, when Jesus is saying stuff like, you have heard that it was said, but I say this, right? So you understand it this way. Maybe you've propped up a commentary on what the Torah has said, but I'm trying to go back to the text itself and maybe raise what I'm convinced of is the true understanding of the text, right? And something else that I think I need to say, in the Jewish tradition, like, it's one thing to say that this is what the text says, but part of the exegetical work or the spiritual reading of the text, it requires grappling with how do we make sense of it, and like that's like a Jewish enterprise. It's like it's part of the work, and I'm kind of butchering it the way I'm talking about it, but I know that a Jewish reading of the text, especially no, well, we're talking when we're talking about a Jewish reading of the text, we're primarily talking about the Hebrew text, which is the Bible or the Old Testament. I'm sorry. So they're wrestling with it, and they're not propping up one understanding and saying this is the only way to understand it. I think we've done that in the Western world. We've done that in the evangelical spheres, the fundamentalist spheres, the maybe even the progressive spheres. I can say that too. We're propping up one particular understanding of the text and saying this is the best reading of it, right? When I think the beautiful thing about the Bible, and this is what why I think it is infused with the Spirit, is that it continues to speak. It continues to shape different cultures and contexts or contexts, and it shapes the reader. And in a lot of ways, I've heard this say about the text, it is a mirror. The scripture is a mirror. So if you are filled with hate and you want to find some hate in the scriptures, you're going to find it. If you're filled with greed and you want to find some greed or some things to justify your greed in the scriptures, you're going to find it. But also, if you want to find some love, you're going to find that too. So in a lot of ways, it's a mirror. And there's someone that said that the Bible is only as inspired as you are. So there's something spiritual that's happening when we're reading it, and which makes it hard to give instructions on how to do this thing. It's not like a formula, right? And we can get in trouble with trying to say this is the only way to make sense of this text or to extract meaning, appropriate meaning from the text. I think that gets very dangerous. And granted, on the other hand, you don't want to just go into the Old Testament where there's some talk about genocide and say, okay, God has blessed genocide, so let me go and do that. So that's a way to do scripture, I think, terrible justice. So I'm saying a lot, but I think what I'm trying to do is just get us really thinking, get myself really thinking about how do we have so many understandings, um, so many denominations that are reading the text differently. And I think part of that is because the biggest problem with the scriptures is that inside of the scriptures, we don't have an explicit guide on how to read it, how to make sense of it, how to find meaning from it. We don't have that. And so we have our spiritual leaders. And your spiritual leader is going to have his framework and what he notices. And usually in the church, there's one spiritual leader that is speaking the most, right? A pastor or bishop, whatever. And their reading of the text is what people gravitate to. They kind of just gravitate to this one person. And I think that could be problematic. So what we want to do is just be a part of a community that is trying to leave room and space for everybody to contribute what they see or to talk about what they see in the text. And I think that is a way to extract, I think, good meaning and a good reading of the text when you're doing this communally. So that's my thinking, and those are my opinions. So because that's the problem. I mean, you just can't rely on one person to help you make sense of the text because one person only sees so much. And we see this if you do any um, missionary training, you see that wherever you are, depending on your culture, you're going to see different things in the text. That's just the case. So if only one person is speaking in the congregation, can you see how that could be problematic? Because you're only really teaching one way to make sense of the text, and then all these teachers, these spiritual leaders get trained at the same schools that are funded by the same people, right? And they have to please their donors. So it gets real tricky real quick. So what I'm trying to do is just kind of raise this problem up and acknowledge this as a problem, and maybe we can do what we can to keep that problem in our line of sight, acknowledge it as a problem, and try to work around the text accordingly. I think that's all we can really do. Just some thoughts. I would love to know your thoughts about my thoughts in the comment section below. Is this all just hoopla and crazy talk? Let me know. Thanks for listening.